All right, let's just dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a massive 34-year-old cold case out of Ahmedabad that was finally cracked by the most unbelievable combination of psychology and science. We are looking at a mystery that sat completely frozen for over 3 decades, only to be blown wide open in a way you literally couldn't make up. If you've ever been fascinated by how the human mind works and how it can ultimately totally betray us when we try to bury our darkest secrets, you're going to find this absolutely compelling.
So this phrase, straight from the source material reporting on the case, perfectly captures the bizarre elements of this entire investigation. Usually when we look at cold cases, breakthroughs come from, say, a new witness finally stepping forward or some sudden leap in forensic technology. But here, the catalyst was something that sounds like it belongs in a late-night horror movie rather than an official police report. We are talking about guilt, we're talking about DNA, and yes, we're talking about a so-called ghost.
Which brings us to the big question for us today. How exactly does a ghost solve a 34-year-old cold case? I mean, it sounds completely impossible, right? We all know ghosts don't exactly walk into a precinct and file police reports. But, as you'll see, a perceived paranormal haunting actually led the authorities straight to a deeply buried secret. It goes to show that sometimes the most relentless investigator in a murder case isn't a detective with a badge, it's actually the inescapable conscience of the people who committed the crime.
Section 1. The Haunting of Guilt, a mind tormented by the past. We're going to start not with the crime itself, but with the psychological unraveling that finally broke a decades-long silence. To really get this case, we have to look inside the minds of the perpetrator's family. And this right here brilliantly illustrates the contrast at the very heart of the whole thing. The family genuinely believed they were being tormented by a supernatural spirit. They were absolutely gripped by terror, claiming to be haunted by a shadow and having persistent hallucinations of the victim. That was their perceived torment. But the harsh reality? There was no actual ghost. It was just their own inescapable, crippling guilt over a brutal crime they committed decades ago. Their own minds were projecting that guilt outward, punishing them day after day.
Because they honestly believed this was a paranormal issue, they tried to solve it using supernatural means. In their desperate attempts to exorcise this ghost and find just a little bit of relief, they actually sought out occult practices and tantric rituals. And, well, this is where that fortress of silence they had maintained for 3 decades finally started to crumble. During these rituals to banish the victim's spirit, details of the actual crime slipped out. They were whispered to the outside world. And eventually, those whispers reached the right ears, leading to a massive tip-off to the Ahmedabad City Crime Branch in April 2026.
Section 2. A decades-old mystery. The 1992 disappearance of Farzana.
So to fully grasp this guilt, we need to jump back in time to see exactly what the family was trying so hard to bury. Who was this victim haunting their waking moments? Looking at this timeline, you can clearly see the massive scale of time we're dealing with here. Back in 1992, a woman named Farzana Dosubhai Radhanpuri just vanishes, disappears without a trace. What follows is a massive gap, literal decades of terror, where the family is just consumed by their psychological guilt and hallucinations, essentially living in a self-imposed prison. And that stretches all the way until April 2026, when the crime branch finally gets that tip-off about a very specific property in Qutubnagar, Syed Wadi.
Now just look at this number, 34. 34 years of utter silence. I mean, think about how long that is. Think about holding on to a terrible, dark secret every single day for over 12,000 days. They almost got away with it. They survived multiple decades without the authorities ever catching on. But their 34 years of silence was undone entirely by the human mind's sheer inability to suppress its darkest actions. Section 3. Science solves the case. Digging up the truth in Vatva.
Once the police knew where to look, all those ghosts and superstitions vanished, and cold, hard facts took over. They traded the supernatural for highly methodical forensic science. Now, this wasn't just some reckless dig based on a rumor. On April 29th, they brought in an executive magistrate to supervise the site, right alongside officials from the Forensic Science Laboratory. They carried out a highly targeted excavation of a cesspool located right there on the property, and what they found required them to immediately hand the evidence over for complex DNA profiling.
And wow, check out this number. Investigators had to dig down nearly 18 feet into a cesspool to finally recover the human skeletal remains. 18 feet deep. That paints a chillingly clear picture of just how desperate the perpetrators were to ensure Farzana was never, ever found.
They buried her deep beneath a cesspool, literally trying to cover up their crime with waste and earth.
But 18 feet of dirt? That is absolutely no match for modern science. The remains were sent straight to the Forensic Medicine Department at BJ Medical College for examination, and from there, the Forensic Science Laboratory stepped in. The FSL conducted detailed DNA profiling, and through that indisputable scientific process, they definitively confirmed that the skeletal remains pulled from that pit did in fact belong to Farzana Dosubhai Radhanpuri. The ghost finally had her name back.
Section 4. Motive and Resolution. The Family Conspiracy.
So with the who and the where definitively solved by science, investigators could finally piece together the chilling why. And the motive? It was tragically mundane. Why did they kill her? Well, according to investigators, it all stemmed from prolonged domestic disputes. The family felt that Farzana's lifestyle had brought conflict into their home. But instead of resolving these issues like, a normal family, her husband and his relatives engaged in a sinister conspiracy to murder her, simply to end the arguments. And then they buried her body right there on the property to destroy the evidence.
Which brings us to the arrested individuals. At the very top of the list is her own husband, Shamshuddin Musaji Khedawala, who is now 61 years old. Alongside him is his 63-year-old brother, Iqbal Khedawala. Two other associates, Abdul Karim Yaqubji Javarala and Shalia Bibi Samud Khan Batan, have also been named in the case. Just look at the ages of the husband and brother for a second, 61 and 63. Doing the math, they committed this crime way back in their late 20s. They lived basically their entire adult lives thinking they had successfully buried their secret forever.
But justice is finally catching up. Following that crucial forensic confirmation, the police officially charged the accused under the Indian Penal Code. They are facing Section 302 for murder, Section 201 for the destruction of evidence, and Section 120B for criminal conspiracy. The legal machinery is now fully in motion for a crime committed over 3 decades ago. As we wrap up this explainer, it leaves us with a fascinating, almost poetic realization. Modern DNA science provided the undeniable physical proof needed to close the case, for sure. But it was the inescapable, torturous prison of a guilty conscience that truly cracked it wide open in the first place. I mean, they dug an 18-foot hole to bury Farzana, but they just couldn't bury their own guilt. It really makes you wonder, can you ever truly bury the past? Or is the human mind simply hardwired to eventually dig it back up? Thanks so much for learning with me today, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.